The smell of old wood and old incense mingled with the cold air of that morning in Ohio, when Karen pushed the side door of the small church, almost in a hurry. The narrow corridor smelled musty, yellow lights flashed, and the muffled sound of a male voice came from a room in the back, as if someone was trying to hide an important conversation behind thin walls. It was there, right in the middle of the empty corridor, that she saw something that made her whole body tremble. Emma's purple suitcase, the suitcase that she herself had prepared so carefully for the religious camp, left at the feet of the missionary everyone called a saint, as if it were just another forgotten object. Minutes earlier, inside the car parked outside, the 10-year-old girl had cried so much that she almost vomited, begging not to go, grabbing her seatbelt with her small hands, saying between sobs that she didn't want to be alone with him far away. The scene now seemed completely unbelievable, as if reality had been torn in two. On one side, the church that the whole city respected, full of stained glass windows and beautiful words. On the other, that abandoned suitcase, the closed door, and Daniel's low voice behind the wood, saying something she still couldn't quite understand. Karen's heart raced in a painful way, as if it wanted to come out of her mouth, and a thought crossed her mind with a weight she had never felt before. There was a secret, a hidden truth, and any discovery she made from that moment on could destroy not only her faith, but also her daughter's life. She stood still for a few seconds, not knowing whether to step forward or run back to the parking lot. The silence of the hallway, interrupted only by a distant whisper from behind the door, had something disturbing, almost cruel. Karen felt a shiver go up her spine when she realized that, despite being a building full of benches, crosses, and pictures with love phrases, she felt more in danger inside than in many dark places on the streets of Columbus. He held his own bag tightly, trying to control the despair that threatened to take over his head, and thought of Emma crying, repeating in a broken voice that she didn't want to go to that retreat, not for a day, not for a minute. The contrast was too shocking to ignore. How could something that was supposed to bring peace and hope cause so much fear in a child who had always loved going to church? Before she had the courage to knock on the door, Daniel's voice grew even lower, and she couldn't make out the words, only the tone, too soft, too intimate for someone who claimed to take care of many children at once. The air seemed to get heavier, as if the narrow corridor had become a dead-end tunnel. At that moment, she knew that she could not continue living as if nothing was happening, but she also knew that any hasty step could change everything irreversibly. But to understand how that mother got to this icy hallway, next to the forgotten suitcase and the closed door, you had to go back a few weeks, to a time when there was still hot coffee in the kitchen on Sundays, cheerful music echoing through the house, and an almost blind trust in a neighborhood church. Karen was 39 years old, lived in Columbus, Ohio, and worked as a nurse at a community hospital in the northern part of the city. Her life had never been easy, especially after the divorce, which left her alone with a small girl, a simple two-bedroom house, and many bills to pay. Even so, there was one thing that never changed: the love for Emma and the certainty that she would do anything to protect her daughter. Karen was the kind of mother who knew every expression on the girl's face, the way she frowned when she was tired, the twinkle in her eyes when she was excited, the heavy silence when something bothered her. Emma, at the age of 10, was the center of it all. A sweet girl, shy with strangers but full of imagination, who liked to draw, sing church songs, and collect colorful notebooks. Emma's school was a few blocks from home, an ordinary public school, with full hallways, metal lockers, and a playground at the back with a slide and time-worn swings. Every day, Karen accompanied her to the gate, watched her daughter enter from afar, with her backpack bigger than her back, and only then took a deeper breath, returning to the car to go to the hospital. The routine was tiring, but she felt at peace knowing that at least at school, there were teachers, security guards, and other parents circulating all the time. On Sundays, however, the special place was another. The Grace Community Church, a neighborhood church with stone parking, light walls and wooden benches that creaked when someone moved too much. For Karen and Emma, that church had been a safe haven after their divorce. There, Karen met friends, women who also raised children alone, and Emma found a space where she could sing, participate in Christmas plays, and listen to stories that made her feel loved. It was on one of these Sundays that the missionary Daniel appeared for the first time. He arrived without much fanfare, introduced by the pastor as a man of faith who had already traveled through several states, taking the word of God and organizing camps for children and young people. He was about 45 years old, with hair beginning to turn white on the sides, a wide smile and a firm voice, one of those that fill the salon without difficulty. As the pastor talked about how much Daniel was respected in other communities, many people nodded their heads in approval, impressed by the stories of missions to poor places, of children rescued from the streets, and of families who went back to church after the camps he organized. Karen, sitting in the middle of the room with Emma by her side, listened attentively and felt a certain relief. She thought that maybe it would be good to have someone dedicated to the children, someone who could organize special activities for them, since the church was growing and the volunteers always seemed tired. After the service, in the courtyard of the church, Daniel walked among the families as if he had known everyone for years. He bent down to talk to the children at eye level, made light jokes, praised the drawings that some held in their hands, asked about school and hobbies. Emma, holding a glass of juice, watched everything from a distance, half curious, half shy. Karen pushed her lightly with her elbow, laughing, saying that maybe he would organize a day of play just for the little ones. The missionary approached with a wide smile, asked Emma's name, complimented the purple bow she wore in her hair, and said something like, "You have a special glow, you know." Karen, used to being invisible in many environments, felt a warmth in her chest when she saw someone. From the church pays so much attention to her daughter, it was comforting to imagine that there was a trustworthy adult there, someone with experience, willing to care for the children with affection and faith. In the first few days, everything seemed normal, even too beautiful. Daniel began to appear in all the children's activities, helped organize Sunday school classes, suggested new songs, proposed small biblical theaters. He spoke in a low voice, in a calm manner, and always seemed to have a story ready about some distant city where he had worked with special talent children. The other mothers commented among themselves that it was a blessing to have someone so dedicated to the little ones. Someone who didn't mind staying up late, organizing materials, tidying up the rooms, planning meetings. Karen nodded, even when she felt there was something in his eyes that she still couldn't decipher. It was on a Sunday morning, a few weeks after Daniel's arrival, that the first real discomfort appeared, like a small thorn slowly digging into the skin. The service was over, and the children were in the back area of the church, near a small room used for music rehearsals. Emma had been chosen to help Daniel pick up some materials back there, as he said aloud, smiling at Karen before walking away with the girl. Karen was talking to a friend, but in a few minutes, Emma's light laugh, which she was used to hearing even from afar, disappeared. The hallway became quieter than usual, and Karen felt a little tightness in her chest. She disguised it, continued the conversation, until, turning her face by chance, she saw, out of the corner of her eye, Daniel resting his hand on Emma's shoulder. It would not be a big deal if his hand had stayed there for a brief moment, as a common gesture of affection. But it was not so. His hand took a long time. He stayed there too long, lightly squeezing the girl's shoulder as he leaned over to say something very close to her ear. Emma didn't smile. She was serious, staring at the ground, holding a folder of colored leaves against her chest. Karen felt her heart beat faster, as if she had been startled without knowing exactly why. He tried to hear the words, but he was too far away to understand. Still, a phrase crossed the corridor to her, clear enough to be etched in her memory. A special group only for the most obedient children. When he said special, the look on Emma's face wasn't one of joy. It was doubtful, perhaps uncomfortable. Karen blinked a few times, trying to push away the thought that came up. "You're exaggerating. He's just encouraging the kids," she told herself, remembering everything she had heard about the missionary. The pastor trusted him. The other mothers trusted him. Why couldn't she trust it too? Still, something inside her was moving, like a small thread pulled from the ball of tranquility. When Emma returned to her mother a few minutes later, she was quieter than usual, holding the briefcase as if it were a shield. Karen asked in a light voice what Daniel had said. The girl replied quickly, without looking into her mother's eyes for a long time. "No big deal, Mom. He only spoke of the special praise group for children who behave well." The answer seemed reasonable, but the way Emma pressed her fingers to the edge of the briefcase said something else. That first discomfort wasn't enough for Karen to break it all up, but it planted a seed of doubt. In the following days, she tried to remember the scene without letting fear take over, mentally repeating that perhaps she was seeing trouble where there was none. After all, how many loving adults with children did not exist? How many leaders did not hug, praise, caress the hair of a boy or girl in the group? Still, every once in a while, especially at night, when the house was quiet and Emma had fallen asleep, Karen wondered, why did his hand linger so long on that shoulder? Why did he speak of a special group in such a closed, almost secret way? And mainly, why did the daughter who always vibrated with any church activity now seem a little more tense when it came to being alone with Daniel? The thoughts came and went. Sometimes they seemed exaggerated, as if the desperation of a single mother made her too suspicious of any man who approached her daughter. At other times, however, the images of the corridor, the hand on the shoulder, Emma's serious expression, came back with such force that she felt a dangerous butterflies in her stomach. Time would show that that small moment, on that seemingly quiet morning, was the first sign of something much greater. At that moment, however, Karen still believed that she could control the situation just by observing a little more, staying attentive, without causing alarm. She had no idea that in a few weeks she would be sitting alone in her car outside the church, listening to her own daughter cry in despair not to go to a camp organized by the very man everyone called a blessing. As these memories mingled in Karen's mind, she still didn't know that every doubt she tried to push deep in her chest would turn into an almost unbearable weight. The church in suburban Columbus had long been the safest place in the world for her and Emma. It was there that the two found solace after nights of fighting at home before their divorce. It was there that Emma first performed singing in the children's choir. It was there that Karen cried, hidden in the girls' bathroom, and received hugs from friends she barely knew. There, among wooden benches and colorful stained glass windows, she believed she had found a new family, a space where her daughter could grow up surrounded by trusted adults. However, from that first lingering tap on the shoulder, that phrase about a special group, the nights began to change. The prayers began to have a different tone, less of gratitude and more of supplication, as if Karen was asking all the time, in silence, for God to help her understand what was really happening to Emma. If you've come this far in this story, it's because real stories, full of fear, courage, and discoveries, really move you. Help this type of content reach other people who also need to hear about maternal instinct and protection. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell to follow the next chapters of this trajectory. On an average Sunday, before everything got worse, life seemed to follow a normal path in the small two-bedroom house that Karen rented in a quiet neighborhood of Columbus. It was early spring. The cold was still cutting the air a little in the early hours of the morning, but the sun was already starting to come in stronger through the kitchen windows. Karen woke up early as she always did on service days, tied her hair in a simple bun, and began to prepare pancakes while the smell of fresh coffee filled the room. The pale linoleum floor creaked slightly as she paced back and forth, arranging plates, picking up cups, mentally checking everything she needed to do before leaving for church. At the back of the house, in Emma's room, you could hear a little voice humming a song that the girl had learned in the children's group of Grace Community Church. It was a light song about trust and love, which Emma repeated without realizing it, as if it were a second breath. The scene was simple, but full of meaning for Karen. After the divorce, when her ex-husband left, and left more debts than good memories, Sunday mornings had been one of the few times when she felt, in some way, normal. There was something special about waking up, making coffee, calling Emma to the table, and knowing that the two of them would then get ready to go to church together. It was like a ritual that sustained an important part of the life of mother and daughter. Emma entered the kitchen still in her pajamas, her hair a little messy and her eyes shining because of the music she was still humming. He sat down at the table, filled his plate with pancakes and syrup, and began to tell, as if he couldn't keep a secret, what he had rehearsed with the other children the previous week, a new song with clapping and small gestures which would be presented at the end of the month. As she listened to her daughter speak, Karen smiled and nodded, but a part of her watched everything in silence. The way Emma spoke of church activities was still cheerful, but every now and then when she mentioned Daniel's name, there was a small, barely perceptible pause, a quick averting of her gaze, as if she were choosing her words carefully. Karen noticed, kept it inside, but avoided reacting abruptly. She didn't want to put fear in her daughter, nor project her own insecurities into every detail. Even so, his stomach tightened slightly. After breakfast, as he washed the dishes, he looked out the kitchen window at the small backyard, where the wind swayed a skinny tree and a few dry leaves piled up near the fence. She thought that if something was really wrong, she would see it clearly, because she knew Emma like no one else. The drive to the church was short, about 15 minutes by car, past low-rise houses, small neighborhood shops, and an elementary school with a colorful playground. Emma talked endlessly in the back seat, though again she avoided going into detail when it came to the special group Daniel mentioned from time to time. Grace Community Church appeared on the corner as a familiar spot. Cream walls, modest stained glass windows, a simple sign with the name and times of services. In the parking lot, cars of different sizes were arriving, parents cramped in Sunday clothes, children in flowery dresses or tidy shirts running between the rows of vehicles. Karen always parked near the same tree, where there was a bit of shade and a good view of the main door of the church. He liked to observe the movement, not only out of habit, but because he felt that if something went out of the ordinary, his watchful eye would notice. On that day, the service began like so many others. The choir sang, the pastor preached, the families greeted each other. Daniel, sitting with the other leaders in the front row, stood up a few times to help with the praise, holding the microphone securely and leading the church in songs that spoke of surrender, trust, and obedience. At the end, he was called to the pulpit to talk a little about the plans with the children of the community. He spoke of reading projects, music rehearsals, meetings on Saturdays, and finally mentioned that he was preparing something very special for the coming months, a weekend retreat in a more remote place where children could get closer to God without distractions. People clapped, some mothers smiled emotionally, fathers looked at each other with satisfied expressions. The idea of taking the children out of the city for a few days seemed good, healthy. After the service, while the adults chatted near the coffee served in the entrance hall, the children ran to the children's area. Emma, still holding the church bulletin, was approached by Daniel, who bent down until he was at her eye level. Karen saw the scene from afar. He lightly touched the girl's arm, smiled, and pointed to a room at the end of the hallway. Emma hesitated for a second, but ended up going with him, looking quickly at her mother, as if silently asking permission. Karen answered with a small smile, but her chest became heavy. The corridor that led to that room seemed darker than the rest of the church, and the door, although open at that moment, conveyed the feeling that it could close at any moment. When Emma returned some time later, she had in her hands a colourful pamphlet with drawings of bonfires, tents, and smiling children. It was the first material from that camp. Daniel came after her, approached Karen, praised Emma, said that she had a pure heart, perfect for deeper activities. He said that it would be an honor to have her at the retreat, that she could help take care of the younger children, who was one of the ones he trusted the most. Karen listened, smiled out of politeness, but the word deep and the phrase, one of the ones I trust the most, kept echoing in her mind in a strange way. There was nothing clearly wrong, but the way he referred to Emma, as if he separated her from the others, as if there was an invisible line between the ordinary children and his special ones, bothered her. In the following days, the routine was fixed, but with small cracks that only a very attentive mother could notice. Emma continued to go to school in the morning, did homework in the kitchen, watched favorite cartoons in the afternoon. On Wednesday nights, however, the kids' night at church became almost a ritual, a meeting in which Daniel led games, told stories, rehearsed songs, and, according to him, worked the children's hearts for something bigger. Karen left Emma at the door, watched from inside the car as the girl entered the illuminated corridor, always surrounded by other children. But over time, he began to notice an unsettling pattern. Almost every Wednesday night, Daniel would call a group of 6 or 7 girls, almost always the same girls, to help him with special tasks in the back room. The room was in a more hidden part of the building, away from the main hall. Once, Karen went to pick her up early and stood in the parking lot, pretending to fiddle with her phone, while actually looking out the window of the side hallway. He saw the children playing in the great hall, running between chairs, but he did not see Emma among them. After a few minutes, he realized that the door to the back room was almost closed. Inside, light on, shadows moving. Daniel entered, closed the door carefully, and the sound of voices was muffled. Karen's heart raced. She could just walk in, knock on the door, say she was there, but she held back. "You're being dramatic," she thought, trying to convince herself. "He's a church leader. He wouldn't do anything bad. It's okay, it's just a special activity." When Emma finally left the church that night, it was time to leave. Her eyes were a little red. Karen asked if she was tired, if she had run too much. The girl replied yes, that she was just tired, that it had been a long day. But as he spoke, he rubbed his hands together, as if they were too cold, even inside the heated car. Karen, in the driver's seat, felt her chest tight again. He tried to start a conversation about the games, the songs, the friends. Emma talked about some games, a new song, but when her mother mentioned Daniel's name and asked what those special tasks were like, the girl frowned, shrugged her shoulders and said only that it was a leader's thing and that the parents wouldn't understand it properly. "It must be just shyness or nervous about so much news," Karen repeated to herself that night, lying in bed, staring at the dark ceiling. But her body didn't believe it. Her heart beat faster, a strangely uncomfortable cold spread through her belly, and sleep was hard to come. She turned on her side, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and heard the distant sound of a car passing by on the street. He tried to convince himself that he was exaggerating, that he could not see evil in everything. He remembered that he grew up hearing that the church was a safe place, that men of faith were different, that religious leaders were above suspicion. Still, an inner voice whispered something else. What if it's not okay? What if this blind trust is precisely what allows terrible things to happen in silence? She was torn between the need to trust and the instinct to protect, not knowing that, very soon, a news broadcast on the TV in the living room, a seemingly simple conversation at home, and a camp announcement would forever change the way she saw that missionary, that church, and even the city itself. because despite trying to stifle it, fear had already opened a space inside her. And no hot coffee, no friendly smile, no nice words from the pulpit would be enough to erase the little clues that were beginning to come together, like pieces of a puzzle that she wasn't yet ready to put together. After nearly 2 hours on the road, the white bus turned through a narrow dirt entrance, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to form a dingy green tunnel. Karen, who had been following some distance, slowed down and felt her heart tighten when she saw the vehicle disappear behind a worn wooden sign with hand-painted letters that announced Camp New Hope. The road was so narrow that one car could barely fit next to the other, and the dirt floor raised a fine dust that stuck to the windshield. She looked around, realizing that the area was completely isolated. On one side, a dense forest. On the other, empty fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. There were no houses, no gas stations, nothing that indicated human presence nearby. It was as if that piece of land had been forgotten by the rest of the world, a place where screams could be lost in the wind without anyone noticing. Karen parked the old car a few feet before the sign, hiding it behind some other vehicles that were already there, probably from parents who had come to drop off groceries or help set up the huts. She turned off the engine and sat for a few seconds, with her hands still holding the steering wheel, trying to control her breathing that was fast and irregular. The silence of the place was heavy, interrupted only by the distant sound of birds and the rustling of leaves in the wind. She looked in the rearview mirror, saw her own pale face, the tired eyes of someone who had barely slept the night before, and thought that maybe she was going crazy. But then she remembered Emma's panicked expression the morning before, the tears streaming down the girl's face, the little fingers grabbing her seatbelt as if it were the only thing keeping her alive, and she knew she couldn't turn back. She got out of the car slowly, closing the door carefully so as not to make a noise, and walked along the dirt road to a point where she could see the camp without being seen. What he saw ahead confirmed all his worst impressions. The huts were simple, made of dark and old wood, with tin roofs that already showed signs of rust. They were arranged in a semicircle around a small, dark lake, whose water reflected the grey sky in an almost menacing way. There were no security fences. There were no signs indicating emergency exits. There were not enough adults to take care of so many children. By far, Karen counted only 3 or 4 adults besides Daniel, all dressed casually, talking to each other without much attention to what was happening around them. The children got off the bus in a line, carrying backpacks and small suitcases, laughing and talking animatedly. Daniel was in front, with a megaphone hanging around his neck and a wide smile on his face, indicating where each group should go. He spoke loudly, enthusiastically, saying something about a weekend they would never forget, full of blessings and learning. Karen saw Emma among the children, walking slowly, with her purple backpack on her back and her head down. The girl did not smile. While the others ran to the huts, Emma walked as if each step was too heavy, as if she were being dragged to a place she didn't want to be. It was then that Karen noticed something that made her stomach turn. Daniel separated a group of 6 or 7 girls, including Emma, and took them to a remote hut further back, near the edge of the lake. The cabin was smaller than the others, with a single window on the side and a wooden door that creaked when opened. The other children were distributed to the larger huts, closer to the center of the camp, where there was an extinguished fire and some wooden benches. But that special group of girls was isolated, placed away from the rest, as if they needed a different treatment, a separate care. Karen felt a chill down her spine. Why did he need a cabin all to themselves? Why couldn't they stay with the other children? What was so special about those girls that justified keeping them apart? She stood there, hidden behind a tree, watching everything with her heart beating in her neck. She saw Daniel enter the hut with the girls and close the door. The window had a torn curtain that swayed in the wind, and for a few seconds Karen could see shadows moving inside, but she couldn't hear anything but the muffled sound of voices. The tightness in his chest increased. She looked around, looking for someone, any adult who might be paying attention. But everyone was too busy arranging the other huts, unloading boxes of food, organizing materials for activities. No one seemed to care what happened in that remote cabin. No one seemed to find it strange that a grown man should be alone with a group of small girls, away from everyone's eyes. Karen returned to the car, feeling her legs wobbly and her hands sweaty. He sat in the driver's seat, locked the doors, and leaned his head against the steering wheel, trying to think of some plan. He knew he couldn't just storm the camp and demand that Emma come back. That would draw too much attention, and Daniel could easily convince the other adults that she was being exaggerated, paranoid, even unstable. He needed something more concrete, proof, some evidence to show that his suspicions were not unfounded. But how to achieve this without putting Emma at risk? How to find out what really happened in that cabin without being seen, without being stopped, without causing a scandal that could make everything worse? He stood there for hours, watching from afar, mentally writing down every detail. She watched the children go out for lunch, eating sandwiches, sitting on wooden benches near the lake. He saw Daniel circle between them, touching a shoulder here, stroking a head there, always smiling, always looking like the perfect, caring leader. But she also saw that whenever she approached the girls in the special group, her way changed. The smile became more intimate, almost complicit. He would bend down to their eye level, whisper something Karen couldn't hear, and they would respond with nods, as if agreeing with something that shouldn't be said out loud. In the afternoon, when the sun began to set and the shadows of the trees stretched over the camp, Karen decided to take a chance. Some parents had returned to leave extra groceries, and she mingled with them, pretending to be lost, looking for the office at the camp. He walked along the dirt paths, his bag slung over his shoulder and his heart racing, trying to look casual as he watched everything around. He came close to the outlying hut, the same one where Daniel had taken the girls in the morning, and saw that the door was closed. Through the side window, he could see a faint light inside. She took a few steps towards the door, thinking of knocking, of making up some excuse to come in, but before she could get closer, she heard a voice behind her. An older woman wearing a t-shirt with the camp's logo approached with a stiff smile. She asked if Karen was looking for something, if she needed help. Karen, trying to disguise her nervousness, said she was looking for the office to leave a message for her daughter. The woman, in a polite but firm tone, replied that this area was restricted, that it was only for leaders and children in special discipleship, and that she should return to the main area if she wanted to talk to someone. The way she said special discipleship sounded rehearsed, as if it were a memorized phrase, repeated so many times that it had already lost its meaning. Karen felt a chill. He thanked him, turned around, and returned to the car, with sweaty hands and the feeling of knocking on an invisible door, a barrier he couldn't cross no matter how hard he tried. Back in the car, she locked the doors and sat there, staring at the remote cabin, promising herself that she would not give up until she understood what was going on inside. The sky began to darken, the wind grew colder, and the children were called to dinner. Karen saw Emma coming out of the cabin, walking slowly, her shoulders slumped and her gaze lost. The girl looked smaller than she was, as if she had shrunk under the weight of something invisible. Karen wanted to run out of the car, take her daughter in her arms, and take her away from there immediately, but she held on. He needed to be patient. I needed to be smart, because if he acted on impulse now, without proof, without a plan, he could lose the only chance he had to protect Emma for real. At the end of the day, when the sun had set and the first stars were beginning to appear in the sky, Karen watched from afar as the children dined in the simple dining room, a wooden shed with long tables and benches. The yellowish light of the lamps hanging from the ceiling illuminated the tired faces of the children, who ate in silence, some laughing softly, others yawning. Karen, hiding near a tree, could see Emma sitting at one end of the table, stirring the food without much interest, with a lost look. The girl was quieter than usual. She didn't talk to the other children. She didn't smile. She seemed to be somewhere else, far away, lost in thoughts that Karen couldn't reach. After the meal, as the children got up to go to the bathroom or fetch more water, Karen discreetly approached the shed, standing near a side window from which she could hear the conversations. It was then that he heard something that made his blood run cold. Two girls, standing near the bathrooms, were talking in low voices. One of them, with blonde hair tied in a ponytail, said, "Daniel said that whoever is part of the secret circle will be more special to God." The other, a girl with glasses who should not have been more than 9 years old, replied, "But he also said that it is a sin to tell your parents, right? That God is sad if we talk." The words hit Karen like a punch in the stomach. Secret circle. Sin to tell parents. More special for God. Karen felt a shiver run down her spine, as if someone had wiped ice on her skin. The phrases echoed in her head, mixing with the images of the news she had seen on TV weeks ago. Reports about cases of abuse in religious institutions, of leaders who manipulated children using faith as a weapon, of families destroyed by secrets kept in the name of God. It all started to fall into place in a frightening way. Emma's crying, her refusal to go to camp, her red eyes after Wednesday nights at church, the way she avoided talking about special activities, Daniel's hand lingering on the girl's shoulder that first Sunday. It was no longer an exaggeration. It was no longer paranoia. It was a clear, stark warning, impossible to ignore. Karen got back to the car, her legs shaking and her heart pounding so hard it seemed to want to come out of her mouth. He sat in the driver's seat, closed his eyes, and tried to take a deep breath, but the air didn't seem to get right into his lungs. His hands sweated cold, his stomach turned, and a wave of nausea rose up his throat. She needed to do something. He needed to act. But what? Call the police now with no hard evidence, nothing but whispered conversations and a mother's intuition. Would anyone believe her? Wouldn't they see her as an exaggerated mother, one of those who sees danger in everything, who can't trust anyone? What if she was wrong? What if all of this was really innocent, just a different way of teaching children about faith, and it was destroying a good man's reputation because of an unfounded suspicion? But then she remembered the phrase that the girls had said, "It is a sin to tell your parents." What kind of religious teaching would tell a child to hide something from his parents? What kind of discipleship needed so much secrecy, so much isolation, so much separation? Karen knew, deep down, that something was deeply wrong. She knew that if she did nothing now, if she let Emma spend another night in that camp, she might never forgive herself again. He needed proof. He needed something concrete that would show, beyond a shadow of a doubt, what was really going on in that out-of-the-way cabin. And it was then that he had an idea. Emma always carried a small backpack for special activities. If Karen could get a tape recorder hidden inside her backpack, she could hear exactly what Daniel was saying to the girls. It would be risky, perhaps even invasive, to violate the trust he had built with his daughter over the years. But what was the alternative? Wait, trust, pray that everything would be okay. The night was long and torturous. Karen stayed in the car, curled up in the seat, with a thin blanket over her shoulders, looking at the clock every half hour. The camp went silent after the lights in the huts went out. Only the dim light of a lamp in the main hut was still on, probably where the adult leaders slept. Karen barely shutted her eyes. Every time she started to doze off, she heard the girls' voices saying "secret circle" and "sin to tell your parents." And she woke up, startled, her heart racing. He thought of Emma sleeping in that remote hut, far from her, far from any protection. She thought of the other girls, all small, all vulnerable, all trusting Daniel because his parents had said he was a man of God. She thought about how many times the fear of seeming exaggerated had prevented mothers from acting, from protecting, from saving. As the sky began to clear, Karen got out of the car, stretched out her numb legs, and walked to the camp's bathroom, a small wooden shed with poor toilets. He washed his face in the icy sink, looked at his own reflection in the fogged mirror, and saw a woman he barely recognized, eyes red with tiredness, messy hair, the expression of someone who was fighting an invisible war. But he also saw determination. He saw courage. He saw a mother who wasn't going to give up. He got back in the car, took the little tape recorder he had brought, the one he sometimes used to record work reminders, and tested it to make sure it worked. The device was small, about the size of a matchbox, and would easily fit into the inside pocket of Emma's backpack without being noticed. When the sun finally appeared on the horizon, the children began to leave the huts for breakfast. Karen saw Emma from afar, walking slowly, with the purple backpack on her back. He waited for the right moment, when the girl moved away from the group a little to go to the bathroom, and approached discreetly. He called Emma in a whisper, motioning for her to come closer. The girl looked around, afraid of being seen, and ran to her mother, who was hiding behind the cafeteria shed. Karen hugged her daughter tightly, feeling her small body trembling against hers, and said in a choked voice, "I'm here, my love. I'm not going to let anything bad happen to you." Emma began to cry softly, grabbing her mother's waist, and Karen, with trembling hands, opened the girl's backpack and put the tape recorder in the inside pocket, hidden under a notebook and some colored pencils. He told Emma that it was just to make sure everything would be okay, that it was a little secret from them, and that his mother would be around all the time. The girl, her eyes filled with tears, asked if she could go home. Karen felt her heart break, but she knew she couldn't get Emma out of there at that moment, not without causing a scandal, not without getting the attention of Daniel and the other leaders. I had to wait. I needed to be patient. Just a few more hours, and I would have the proof I needed. He hugged his daughter once more, kissed her forehead, and sent her back to the group, promising that soon they would be together again, safely. Hours later, already back in the hidden car, Karen saw Emma being taken once again to the remote cabin, along with the other girls of the special group. Daniel walked ahead, smiling, talking to them in a way that seemed casual, but that Karen now recognized as calculated, manipulative. She clasped her hands against the steering wheel, feeling her nails dig into her skin, and looked at her watch. I had to wait. I needed to trust that the recorder was working, that it was capturing everything that was said inside. The wait was agonizing. Every minute seemed like an hour. Karen looked at the cabin, at the window with the curtain torn, and wondered what was going on inside. Was Emma okay? Was he afraid? Could she last another day there? When the children finally returned to the cafeteria, Karen got out of the car and ran discreetly to the camp's bathroom. She waited for Emma to come in, pretended to be passing by, and when the girl came out, she motioned for her to come closer. He quickly grabbed his backpack, took the tape recorder out of his inner pocket, and hid it under his blouse. Emma looked at her mother with an expression of relief mixed with fear, and Karen said in a firm voice, "It's going to be all right. Trust me." The girl nodded, wiped away her tears, and went back to the cafeteria. Karen, with the tape recorder pressed to her chest, returned to the car with wobbly legs and her heart racing. He sat in the driver's seat, locked the doors, and, with his hands shaking so much that he could barely hold the device, he pressed play. At first, only silence, then the muffled sound of footsteps, doors closing, voices of children laughing nervously, and then Daniel's voice, smooth, calm down, almost hypnotic. The phrases Karen heard next would forever change the way she saw that man, that church, and even the city itself. Because in that little tape recorder was the truth she was so afraid to discover. And it was worse, much worse, than anything I could have imagined. If you're here so far, it's because this story is really moving you. What follows will show the exact moment when everything changed, when doubt turned into certainty and fear into action. So stay until the end, because nothing that happened was by chance, and every detail you are discovering can be the missing piece to understand everything. In the recording, Daniel's voice started soft, almost comforting, as if he were telling a story to children before bed. But as the sentences progressed, the tone changed. It became more intimate, darker, as if he were revealing secrets that no one else could know. Karen heard him say, in that calm, controlled voice, "You are special girls, chosen by God for something greater. No one out there will understand what happens here because ordinary people don't have the same light that you have." There was a silence, followed by low murmurs from the girls, as if they were agreeing or perhaps just trying to process what they heard. Karen felt her stomach turn. He kept listening, his heart beating faster and faster. Daniel's voice continued, "God is pleased when you obey, when they trust me. I was sent to teach you about true love, about how to offer your body as a sacred gift." Karen felt a wave of nausea rise up her throat. He squeezed the tape recorder so hard that his fingers turned white. The words he heard were like stabbings, each one more painful than the last. He continued, "The touches I do on you are different. They are sacred touches. They are not like other people's touches. When I touch you, it's God playing. And whoever tells this to someone who tells their parents will make God cry. It will break the alliance we have here." Karen heard nervous laughter, muffled cries, and then Emma's small voice trembling, asking, "But it hurts a lot. The way it hurt yesterday. I don't want it any more." Daniel's response was quick, firm, almost threatening. "That's just the beginning, honey. Then you will understand that pain is part of growing up. It's part of becoming special. Now be quiet and obey." Karen felt the world spin. She had to hold on to the cold bathroom sink to keep from falling. Her legs wobbled, her breathing became labored, and for a moment she thought she was going to faint. But then something inside her broke. It was no longer fear. It was no longer a doubt. It was fury. It was determination. It was the strength of a mother who had just heard proof that her daughter was being destroyed by a monster disguised as a saint. At that moment, there was no more room for hesitation, for fear of judgment, for concern about what others would think. Karen knew with painful, utter clarity that she needed to get Emma out of there immediately. He needed to confront Daniel. I needed to expose that man, tear off the mask he wore in front of everyone, show the world who he really was. He left the bathroom with the tape recorder hidden in his bag and walked towards the cafeteria with firm, decisive steps. His face was pale, his eyes full of tears of anger, but the expression was that of one who was not going to back down. Not now, not after all he had heard. When he entered the cafeteria, the atmosphere was relatively quiet. Some children were still eating, others had already finished and were talking in small groups. Daniel was sitting at one of the tables, laughing with some of the other leaders, as if nothing was happening. Karen looked around, looking for Emma, and saw her sitting at one end, with her head down, fiddling with the food without eating. Karen's heart broke once again to see her daughter like this, so small, so fragile, so destroyed. But then the anger came back with a vengeance. She walked to the table where Daniel was, cell phone in hand, and stopped right in front of him. He looked up, still smiling, and said in that soft voice that Karen now hated with all her might, "Karen, what a surprise! Did you come to visit Emma?" Karen didn't answer. He just lifted his cell phone, connected it to the small portable speaker he had in his bag, and played the recording. Daniel's voice filled the dining hall, clear and unmistakable. "Your body is a gift that only I can teach to offer to God in the right way. His touches are sacred. Whoever tells someone will make God cry." The silence that followed was deafening. All conversation stopped. All the children looked up. All the adults were paralyzed. Daniel turned pale. He stumbled up from his chair and tried to say something, but Karen interrupted him, shouting, her voice full of anger. "I know what you've done. I have proof of everything. You won't get close to my daughter anymore." He tried to explain himself, babbling something about misunderstanding, about spiritual dynamics, about wrong context, but Karen wouldn't let him. He grabbed Emma by the shoulders, put the girl behind him, and kept shouting, "You're a monster. You used the faith of these children to hurt them, but it's over. I called the police. They are already coming." And it was true. Before entering the dining hall, Karen had called the local police, quickly explained the situation, and asked them to send a patrol to the camp. Within minutes, the sound of sirens echoed down the dirt road, and 2 police cars rolled into the camp, kicking up dust. The officers quickly went downstairs, went to the cafeteria, and when they heard part of the recording that Karen was still playing on the cell phone, they separated Daniel from the rest of the group. He tried to flee, took a few steps towards the exit, but was intercepted by one of the police, who held him by the arm and immobilized him. The handcuffs were placed on Daniel's wrists as he tried to justify himself, saying that it was all a misunderstanding, that Karen was crazy, that he had never done anything wrong. But the police did not listen. They took him to the car, read his rights, and put him in the back seat. Karen, still trembling, hugged Emma tightly, feeling her daughter's small body sobbing against hers. He said in a choked voice, "It's over, my love. You are safe now. Mommy won't let anyone hurt you ever again." Emma cried endlessly, clutching her mother's waist, repeating between sobs, "I was afraid to tell. I thought no one would believe me." Karen, tears streaming down her face, replied, "I will always believe in you, always. You were very brave." As Daniel was taken away by the police, other mothers began to arrive at the camp, attracted by the sirens and the frantic calls of the other leaders. Some looked at Karen with gratitude, others with shock, others with shame for not having noticed sooner. One of them, a woman with grey hair and red eyes from crying, approached Karen and said, "Thank you. You saved my daughter too. I should have noticed. I should have listened when she tried to tell me." Karen held her hand and said, "It's not your fault. He deceived everyone. But now it's over. Now they are safe." In the following days, the story exploded in the small town of Columbus. Local newspapers published reports about the imprisoned missionary, about the abuse allegations, about the mothers who came together to protect their daughters. Other families came forward with similar accounts, some crying for never having had the courage to listen to their children until the end, others thanking Karen for being the first to act. The police investigation revealed that Daniel had already been to other churches in neighboring states, always leaving in a hurry after rumors about special methods with children. He had never been arrested before because there had never been concrete evidence. There had never been a mother brave enough to stand up to him. Daniel was remanded in custody, awaiting trial. The accusation included multiple cases of abuse, psychological manipulation, and using the position of religious authority to commit crimes against children. Grace Community Church has undergone a complete overhaul. The entire leadership of the children's ministry was changed. Strict transparency rules were created, and the presence of at least 2 adults in any activity with children, with doors always open and windows visible, became mandatory. Karen, once discreet and almost invisible in the congregation, has become an active voice. She began to speak at community meetings, in mothers' groups, in schools, telling other women that a mother's instinct is not an exaggeration, it is a warning. Emma started therapy with a child psychologist referred by another mother who also had children involved in the case. The sessions were difficult, full of crying and painful memories, but little by little the girl began to open up, to talk about what had happened, to understand that none of it had been her fault. Karen followed each session, held her daughter's hand, and promised herself that she would never stop listening, never ignore a sign, no matter how small. She began attending support groups, where she met other mothers who struggled with the guilt of not having realized before, of not having acted quickly enough. Together, they supported each other, exchanged experiences, learned to deal with pain, and transform it into something productive, into protection for other children. The community has changed. Conversations about child safety, previously avoided or treated as exaggeration, have become frequent. Lectures on signs of abuse were organized in schools and churches. Parents began to pay more attention to changes in their children's behavior, to ask questions, to not accept vague answers when something seemed wrong. Karen became a reference, someone to whom other mothers turned to when they had doubts, when they felt that something was not right. And she always said the same thing: trust your gut. If your heart tightens, listen. If your daughter cries, stop everything. If something seems wrong, don't wait for confirmation from anyone, because in the end, no one knows the fear of a child like the mother herself. Emma, over time, began to recover. She smiled again, sang again, drew again. The invisible marks were still there, and probably would be for a long time, but now there was hope. There was support. There was a mother who was not going to give up, who was going to fight every day for her daughter to feel safe again. Karen learned in pain that a mother's love is also a scream. It is distrust when everything seems too beautiful. It is courage to face an entire church, a dear leader, an entire city, if necessary. Before we continue to the end of this story, help bring real stories to those who really care. If you want to be part of this mission of protection and courage, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any content that can save lives. Months have passed since that day at camp, and Karen and Emma's lives have never been the same. Autumn came to Columbus with orange leaves that covered the small backyard of the two-bedroom house, and the cold air of the season began to pour in through the kitchen windows, bringing with it a smell of wet earth and a new beginning. Karen was sitting at the table, stirring a cup of coffee that had already cooled, watching Emma drawing with colored pencils in a new notebook. The girl still carried invisible marks in her eyes, that way of hesitating before smiling, of looking to the sides when someone approached too quickly. But little by little, the smiles appeared again, even if shy, even if fragile. Emma was now talking about the new church they attended, a smaller, simpler place, where all doors were open during children's activities, and parents could follow every moment without having to ask permission or face suspicious looks. Karen felt a lump in her throat every time she looked at her daughter, and she remembered that horrible morning when Emma had cried so much, begging not to go to camp, holding on to the seatbelt of the car as if it was the last thing keeping her alive. She remembered how, for a second, she had almost said, "It's just silly fear, you need to go." She had almost ignored the instinct that screamed inside her, saying that something was deeply wrong. If she had done that, if she had pushed Emma into that bus and gone home thinking she was being exaggerated, what would have happened? How many more nights of pain would the daughter have faced? How many more marks would have been left on that small, innocent heart? The sound of the recording still came back in some dreams, like a ghost that insisted on not going away. Daniel's voice distorting God's name, turning sacred words into tools of manipulation. The muffled cries of the girls, Emma's small voice asking if it was going to hurt, asking if it was normal, if that was how God wanted it. Karen woke up in the middle of the night, sweaty, with her heart racing, and needed to get out of bed, go to her daughter's room and see that she was there, safe, sleeping peacefully under the flowered blanket. Only then could he breathe again. Only then could she go back to her own bed and try to sleep again. But now, as she looked at Emma there in the kitchen, drawing a house with flowers in the garden and a yellow sun in the sky, Karen understood that having followed that bus on that Ohio road had been the exact line between eternal guilt and the courage that saves. It had been the moment when maternal instinct overcame fear of other people's judgment, when protection overcame social convenience, when love overcame paralysis. In the days after Daniel's arrest, many mothers showed up at Karen's door, some with their hands cold with nervousness, others holding pictures of their daughters as if they were proof that they had also been victims, all with the same look of fear mixed with shame for not having heard the signs sooner, for not having believed when their daughters tried to speak, for having blindly trusted someone just because he wore the mask of faith. At each meeting, Karen held the hands of these women and repeated the same phrase, almost like a prayer that had to be said out loud to come true. It's not your fault. He deceived everyone, but now it's our responsibility not to let that happen again. And they cried together, hugged each other, exchanged phone numbers, formed a support network that didn't exist before. They created a group of mothers who met every week to talk about warning signs, about how to teach children to recognize risky situations, about how to break the silence that so often protected abusers in the name of a supposed community peace. Daniel was still in prison, awaiting trial. The police, pressured by the families and the repercussion of the case in the local press, opened investigations in other cities where he had passed, and every week new reports appeared. Children who had previously been silenced in the name of a misused faith now found the courage to speak up, to tell what had happened, to point the finger and say, "He did this to me too." The investigation revealed a frightening pattern. Daniel always acted in the same way, arrived at a small church, won the trust of the community with beautiful stories of missions and social projects, organized isolated retreats, separated the special children from the rest of the group, and manipulated them, using the language of faith, saying that everything was God's will, that it was a sin to tell their parents that they would be punished if they revealed the secret. The former Grace Community Church has undergone a complete transformation. The pastor, ashamed of not having realized what was happening under his own roof, resigned. A new leadership was elected, with more women in positions of power, with strict rules of transparency and child protection. All the doors of the rooms where activities with children took place now had glass windows, so that anyone could see what was happening inside. Cameras were installed in the corridors. The presence of at least 2 adults in any activity with children became mandatory, and parents gained the right to enter and follow everything without having to warn beforehand. In every parents' meeting, someone remembered Daniel's case, not to reopen wounds, but not to let forgetfulness turn the way to another danger. Karen, who was once discreet and almost invisible in the congregation, became an active voice not only in the church, but in the entire community. She was invited to speak in schools, in mothers' groups, in community meetings. She always said the same thing. A mother's instinct is not an exaggeration, it is a warning. If your heart tightens, listen. If your daughter cries, stop everything. If something seems wrong, don't wait for confirmation from anyone. The women who listened to her shook their heads. Some cried, others wrote down what she said, and many approached her afterwards to thank her, saying that those words had made a difference, that they had given her the courage to act in situations that had previously seemed too nebulous to be questioned. Emma was still in therapy. The sessions were difficult, full of crying and hurting memories, but the child psychologist was patient, affectionate, and little by little helped the girl to understand that none of it had been her fault, that she had done nothing wrong, that the adult responsible for protecting her had failed in a monstrous way. Karen followed each session, held her daughter's hand, and when Emma talked about the things Daniel had done, the things he had said, Karen needed all the strength she had not to run away from there and scream in anger, but she controlled herself because she knew that Emma needed her whole, present firm. At night, when Emma had nightmares and woke up crying, Karen would lie next to her on the simple bed in the small room, hold her hand and say quietly that no one else would touch her without respect, that there was no sacred secret that forced her to keep quiet, that she could say everything always without fear of not being believed. And the girl, little by little, began to sleep again, lulled by the certainty that her mother was there, that she would never leave her alone again. Karen learned in pain that a mother's love is not just affection, it is not just hugs, it is not just sweet words. A mother's love is also a scream. It is distrust when everything seems too beautiful. It is the courage to face an entire church, a dear leader, an entire city if necessary. To every woman who watched this story on a cell phone or television screen, in some neighborhood in the United States or anywhere in the world where mothers fight to protect their children, Karen would leave a direct piece of advice, without a difficult word, without embellishment. If your heart tightens, listen. If your daughter cries, stop everything. If something seems wrong, don't wait for confirmation from anyone. Because in the end, no one knows the fear of a child like the mother herself. No one notices the small changes in the look, in the way they walk, in the tone of voice, like a mother who pays attention. And a minute of courage, a single moment of firm decision can be the difference between a sad memory that lasts a lifetime and a protected, safe life, where the child can grow up knowing that there is someone who believes in him, who fights for him, who will not give up. Karen and Emma's story didn't end with a perfect ending, because real life isn't like that. The marks of what happened were still there, and probably would be for a long time. But there was hope. There was a cure. There was a mother who was not going to give up, who was going to fight every day for her daughter to feel safe again, so that she could smile again without fear, so that she could trust the right people and recognize the wrong ones. And there were other mothers, united, forming a network of protection that didn't exist before, ensuring that no child would have to go through what Emma went through alone, that no mother would have to fight alone like Karen did. If you've made it this far, it's because this story really touched your heart. It's because you understand that protecting those we love is not an exaggeration, it's a duty. It is because you believe that real stories, no matter how painful, need to be told so that other lives are saved. Don't leave now. Take the next step in this journey by watching the next video on our channel, which is appearing on your screen. In it, we will continue to discover stories that touch the heart, that teach, that strengthen. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave yours liked, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our next videos. A big hug and see you in the next exciting story.